It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to the Just My 3 Cents podcast, a live rapid fire interactive podcast where you can hit the link and jump on and join and give us your 3 cents. I really should have called the show that because ultimately that's what I want to happen as we discuss race, sex, and culture, what I'm known for every Saturday morning, the Mental Dialogue Talk Show. This is basically an extension of the Mental Dialogue Talk Show that we do audio only every Saturday morning on Blog Talk Radio, and Just My 3 Cents. Sometimes it's an extension of that show, and other times it could be what's happening in the news, and you can bring on anything in regard to race, sex, and culture. Want it to be an interactive joint where we basically work together to raise the culture, because there's a lot going on out there, and at the end of the day, we try to be intelligent media, if you will, and play a small role in maintaining values that will raise the culture, if you will. And so, to go ahead and get into tonight's discussion, if you will, and I just pretty much kept it real simple. 3 things you must find in a mate. 3 things you must find in a mate. And so, keeping it very simple, but just showing how it relates to race, sex, and culture, because quite often we have relationship conversations on in the Mental Dialogue Community Club. We just had one Saturday where we were discussing what does a wholesome relationship look like, and I was fortunate enough to have on 2 amazing relationship coaches. One been married for 6 years and one married for 31 years, and we had this amazing show. And so, as usual, the last few weeks with Just My 3 Cents, it was something that we do a 2-hour show and we still miss some things. And so it was one thing that got missed that made me say, you know what, let me dig into what I had hoped to do on Saturday's show, was share basically 3 things that people should value or look for in a mate. And I wanted to share it from the standpoint of, for those that don't know, again, my name's Montoya, aka Black Socrates. I'm a philosopher, if you will. I love to watch the world and observe and learn from watching other people. And so, having been involved in a lot of my friends, if you will, learned about their intimate relationships over the years. Some divorced, some happily married. And so over the course of my life, I found these trending things that seem to be very important, especially in 2022. And one of them is it's going to make sense when you hear it, but you don't hear it quite often, in a sense, when looking for a mate. And I had hoped to share it on the show Saturday to see if I was, in a sense, barking up the right tree. And I was, because I had relationship experts on the show. I didn't get to share it. So I'm going to share it with you, all of you that's listening. Hopefully some of y'all could jump on and tell me whether you think what I'm about to say makes sense or don't make sense. That kind of situation. I'm not married, still looking to be married. So these are some things that I'll, in a sense, be looking for in a mate, if you will. In a sense, if that's the ultimate goal. Speaking of being the ultimate goal, let me highlight this one thing, and then we'll get right into these three things that you, in a sense, must find in a mate, if you will. And again, you can hit the link and tell me whether you agree, or give me your own thoughts. One sister shared her 3 things were integrity. I have to go look at it again, but she shared her 3 things, and you can share yours in the chat. I'll try to read the comments and stuff like that. But real quick, before we go right into my 3 things, one thing that I thought was very dynamic from Saturday's show was I ended up asking the relationship coaches, both of them. I asked them, to a degree, in 2022, do we, as a culture, African American cultures maybe specifically, but really just the entire culture of American culture, to a degree, are we starting to aim too low inside of our relationships? And what I meant by that, and like I said, I'll share this part, then we'll get into the 3 things. But are we aiming too low? And the reason that was coming up was because we did a show, what does a wholesome relationship look like? And I remember asking one of the relationship coaches whether we should say wholesome relationship or wholesome marriage. He suggested that we say wholesome relationship because, to a degree, marriage, to a degree, starting to have a bad connotation to a degree, if you will, based on what we're seeing out there, and specifically in our community, where 25% of our women are married, and 33% of Black men are married, and every other culture is around 50%. So we're again just kind of highlighting that. And so he was like, let's use relationship because we don't want to, in a sense, turn people away by focusing specifically on marriage. And so it made me ask that question to a degree: are we aiming too low? And I didn't. And he actually said, absolutely. As a culture, we're aiming too low. He said because when it comes to marriage, most people are, in a sense, not willing to basically accept the level of responsibility and accountability and discipline that a marriage take. And so to a degree, and what I asked him was, I said, is our aim too low? And if our aim is too low, are we destined to failure? And what he said was, absolutely. But the reason he wanted to use relationship is because people are exploring all these various relationships. And so the goal was to get people in the dialogue and realize, in a sense, if you are ever looking for a long-term situation, the aim has to get a little higher. There has to be a little more discipline required in order to make it. And the reality is, in our selfish era, to a degree, people are not really willing to step up. So we claim these other things might be better than marriage as we knew it in the past and things of that nature, because we're not really going to own up to the discipline that's required to successfully be married. That's a lot more difficult. So wanted to highlight that because I thought it was poignant to this discussion. So in the event that whether you're looking for a relationship or marriage, again, my aim is marriage, but I think this applies regardless of whether you want to be married or not. I'll go into the three things, but I just thought that was a big telling sign that the relationship coach agreed, because he sparked me to ask that question. Are we by default failing because we're aiming too low? And a lot of us do have a desire to be in long-term relationships with our mate, and we're coming up with these other versions because we're not willing per se to step up to what a marriage requires, if you will. All right, I beat that in the ground. Let's get into the three things. And so the first one, how will you parent in the event that you are looking to have a long-term mate and children are on the table? Obviously, this doesn't apply if children are not on the table for you. Or, we always know about we've always heard about the conflict of maybe, two people getting together, one wanting children and one not. And a lot of times that can lead to major conflict. So that's something that people do think about just from the standpoint of, do you want to have children? And so that's a question that people do ask. I want to go a little deeper than that, but just pointing out that's a kind of a well-known difference that typically you don't want to have in a marriage where one does and one doesn't. It can definitely lead to a conflict, or sometimes people will get married under one pretense or false pretense, or maybe even sometimes, unfortunately, even change their mind, and that in itself could become a conflict within the marriage or whatever. But a lot of times people are saying, make sure you know one way or the other to be fair to your mate. I think that's pretty sound advice and pretty simple. But I want to go further for those who are desiring children, because I always talk about the idea of what's missing in today's relationships from my observation. Again, if you want to jump in and give me, let me look at the comments too, make sure I'm respecting the comments. Okay, yeah, one says, I believe people, let me put it up there, matter of fact. She says, I believe people are aiming, hold on, I can't see it like that, sorry. Hold on, I want to read your comment. Bear with me, y'all, I'm still learning how to work this thing. People are aiming too low these days because a lot of people are just settling and choosing not to marry. Absolutely. So anyway, stepping through the how will you parent? So I always talk about the concept of what's lost on today to a degree. And a lot of people know. Here's something that we mostly know as a culture, and it's not, again, this is not just Black people, but we're doing a show for us. So I'm talking to us, but I'm not acting like this is only applying to us. So just make sure people don't mistake when I'm talking to us as if it's only us, because I don't delve in false pretense or false narratives like we're the only ones having issues and all that kind of stuff. I don't buy into that BS. But what I do want to point out is something that's quite noticeable throughout the country, but not just for us, is people are more selfish, and our relationship coaches talked about that on Saturday. People are more selfish, even in the idea of getting into relationships and even going into marriages, if you will, more selfishly, right? And so due to that, something that has been a big miss over the last 30, 40, 50 years, some of it's based on what's going on specifically in our community in reference to children, is we've misplaced the concept of legacy within marriage. It's not that none of you think about it, plenty of you still do. However, we've kind of misplaced it, and it has become a little less important as we've made ourselves selfishly a little more important in how the dynamic of our relationship goes. Like, it's quite understandable now that people can, in a sense, explore to go deeper and say, what do I want to have or wish to have within my relationship? So it is very understandable that we are trying to figure out that dynamic. But what's been lost on that is the historic reasons for why humans have married for at least 5,000 years on record, if you will. The earliest on record is 5,000 years ago or whatever. But long-term marriages, if you will, again, we're not talking about just marriages, but I'm highlighting that for those that want children. It was such like you can remember, this ain't that long ago. There was such a time, for example, my mother had me, teenage mother in the 70s. And what I'm about to say, most people know about this. It was very common. My mother is a teenage mother. My father's side assumed that my mother, teenage mother, father, teenage father, assumed they would get married. That was very common, right? Somebody get pregnant and a marriage would follow, and especially before the 70s. Like, that was definitely how it would go quite often. Somebody gets pregnant, a marriage was pretty much expected. Now, my grandmother realized my mother wasn't in a position and they shouldn't get married, which I'll say was a smart decision. At the end of the day, I'll be honest about that, just based on their dynamic together or whatever. They both played important roles in my life, so I'm thankful I love my mother to death, love my father, rest in peace, my father, but definitely played a huge role in my life. But I could definitely, look back on it as I got older and realize my grandmother was probably right about them not getting married at that age, but that was very common. The reason I'm highlighting that is because the reason that was such a common thing, that you would get somebody pregnant on a night of passion, if you will, and then the community would expect you to get married, is because legacy has always been a major reason for why people got married, to include the children and the next generation. Even if you think about powerful families getting together and using marriage, to in a sense increase power. Well, that power was to also last into the next generation. And in this child, arranged marriages are still very popular, but they would happen definitely amongst the powerful throughout history, because marriage had more than a purpose, in a sense of just whether you were in love. And a lot of times the love wasn't even in those situations. It was done for the benefit to the family, because historically, not only were two people marrying, you were always marrying the entire family. Two families were coming together. And so most people understand and know that. So if you think about the fact that we came out of that history, right? That was the history of, in a sense, how marriage, there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just kind of highlighting this for a reason. Watch how I walk into how will you parent and why it matters for those that want children. So if you think, that's only 40 years ago, 50 years ago, where it was commonplace that those two, even teenage parents, were expected to get married. Today, that's not an expectation, even if a woman's in her 20s. That's not an expectation for teenagers. So I'm not saying that whether its expectation is good or bad. I'm talking about the complete change in, just because two teenagers got pregnant, there's absolutely no expectation of marriage. This is not about a right or wrong. I'm just talking about the shift. The reason that there's no expectation is because here's what makes sense. And this is kind of what my grandmother used for my mother when she was a teenager. Like, she, not only was she not ready, but it was no good. It wasn't good for them two to be, like I say, great co-parenting years later. But at that time, as I go back and hear how it was, and I can remember some of it when I was young, how they would go back and forth. Again, not married, but just how they would go back and forth. So my grandmother was right about my mother at that young age shouldn't be married. And so that's the type of things that we take in consideration now. So although a young sister might get pregnant, then it's looked at like, are they compatible? Like, that's being considered, and it's just unexpected. It's not even, it's like there's really no expectation for two teenage parents to get married in American culture. Now, around the world, that's still very different. Cultures still value legacy, and the children matter to that degree. That's the point. The point of why you would expect, two teenage parents to get together, because the whole thing that everybody's thinking about is the children. So now, in an era where that expectation doesn't take place, it is moved to the adults and whether they're compatible and can they make it. And again, it's not about a right or wrong. It's about the fact that we've only shifted to the importance of us in the marriage in the last 40 or 50 years. I'm pointing out the shift, not about the right and wrong, but let's recognize the shift. So once you recognize the shift in the fact that you're now make the point. Now, if you are getting with someone that you want to be married or significant other that you hope to have children with, and we're in an era where we're so focused on whether we can make it, quite often what gets lost on is thinking about how you will raise children. Because there's too many people that I've watched raising of children tear up their marriage because they didn't figure out that. They only stopped at, do you want children? So as long as they both win it. And it's not that they wouldn't have no conversations, but it would be simple conversations. So when you realize that in the history of marriage, legacy included, and marriage was really all about coming together and committing to raise these children into this society. So when marriages were so focused on the children, if you accidentally had a night of passion, the whole community damn near expected y'all to get together for the sake of those children. So that's how important children were historically. And so it can't be simply just, do you want children? It's how will you parent? Because I've watched it break up plenty of marriages. So that's number one. Okay. Let me see if there's any more comments out there. And please jump on this link. Give me your three things. I'm going to go ahead and move into the second thing. This is the most important one of them all. So for those that jumped off, they're missing the one that matters the most. So in 2022, as much as we have conversations about relationships on the Mental Dialogue Talk Show, this is the most important one of all. And so, and this is kind of specific to the African American community from this standpoint. So we're constantly talking about how our generation, the hip hop generation, I'm 48, I always highlight that, same age as hip hop, but I always highlight that the hip hop generation, we are the generation where it became, unfortunately, normal that we might not be born into married homes. We were, in a sense, the first generation where it became normal. Now we're starting to see issues in the 60s, if you will, but it's still like, even like I was, everybody talk, if you ever heard of the Monahan report, if you will, right? We jump McQueen on here with me. So if you heard of the Monahan report, they was talking about how it was an issue that we were at 25% out of wedlock marriages, if you will, way back in the 60s. And now we're all the way up to 73%. Not saying that all those, let's be honest, that's not saying all those children don't have parents actively. Sometimes they're in the home and not married. That's the case. And a lot of men are active. So I don't like to use the number and just leave it out there like that. But I'm highlighting that for this reason, moving into this second one. So because we didn't, in a sense, as a culture, I'm gonna get you on here in a second, Ashley. Because as a culture, we did not, in a sense, haven't seen it naturally. The dynamic of how a man and woman should interact. A lot of our culture has not seen that. So because that's missing, here's also what's missing from our culture, and we see this play out every day. Men and women, and especially boys, myself included, had to learn this. Conflict resolution is not something that we naturally understand, and ideally you would have seen it happen within your family dynamic. If you've never seen it happen in your family dynamic, a lot of times you learn conflict resolution by nature of your peers, and that's usually a lot more visceral, a lot more emotional than watching two adults carry themselves when they're having difficulty in a way that teaches you how to get through conflict, because it's impossible to be married to a degree for somebody for a long time and not learn how to navigate that. I got some more to say on that, but my lady Ashley jumped on here with me, Queen, one of my Queen of Intellects members. So I'm gonna go ahead and, if you will, Ashley, what you got for me? Jump in on this thing before I go a little deeper on my number two thing, which is finding someone who know what I really want to call. Let me say it real clear. What you really should be looking for is someone who knows how to play fair, even amongst conflict. That's what you really should be looking for. But you might want to jump on the last point. So I'm gonna let you jump in on your point. Go ahead, Queen.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the conflict point, but I think when you talk about like legacy building and all of those things, I wonder how much of that is rooted in religion that like some people just don't believe in. You know, like me personally, I'm like, if I have kids by the time I'm 38, fantastic. If I don't, like that's all to it. And I think about, I don't think people, while I think that you should be thinking about like those things, but like, are you thinking about what this looks like in the sacrifice that you have to make? And I think to the point on the discussion for relationships is like, we tend to look at things very surface level, and I'm definitely guilty of that as well. But like when you're talking about children, you're also talking about how much of your own traumas have you fucking dealt with so that you're not passing that on to your kids, because it starts in childhood. A lot of the issues that we face as adults, a lot of the things that we're trying to overcome in adulthood stem from those relationships that we had in childhood. And so like, are you healed? I feel like is one of the things that you should be asking, and not that it's the end all be all, but are you constantly healing? Are you constantly evaluating yourself? Are you constantly trying to elevate and work through these issues and work through these triggers for yourself before you're involving me, before you're involving a child? Because it has ripple effects.
No, absolutely. I think what you're talking about, I think plays out in conflict resolution. A lot of times, whatever our triggers and traumas are, quite often are why we can't get through conflict resolution in a proper way. So I think you're absolutely right of that being very important. I will highlight for the first point, since you mentioned it, no, it's not rooted in religion, because if you look historically, regardless of where religion was at the time or prior to even the major religions that we have in the world, if you go look into any history and look at why different societies were getting together, it was still always, in a sense, the responsibility for this next generation. So that's applied regardless of religion. And so, and to a degree, marriage, people don't realize this today, but it's really, to a degree, always been for the children. And what I mean by always been for the children is, it is, let's say you and I are married. Well, our commitment, even the vow, right? The vow to stay through better or work or whatever.
Right.
Well, the divorce is typically so hard in different societies because the only thing they're concerned about is, do you have children? Like, if you and I don't have children, it's usually easy to get divorced, right? It can be, as long as we're not battling. You know what I mean?
Right.
It ain't that simple sometimes, even when you're not battling, because societies are concerned about who's going to be responsible for these kids. And like I mentioned back in the day, 50 years ago, if you just popped up pregnant, the whole society, damn, they expected us to get married. Why would they expect us to get married? They don't know whether we know each other, like each other or not. They're worried about the children. And that's just one thing that's been lost. So that's not rooted in religion when it comes to, because to a degree, you keep the duty. We selfishly today think of it just for one another. But sometimes if we're together and you done piss me off, I'm still going to do what I'm supposed to, partly for you, but I've made a commitment to this family. Because if it's just you and me and it ain't working out, let's deal. No problem. But a lot of times we will stay even when it's dysfunctional because we're worried about the kids. So I'm just saying, historically, that's been a root that's been lost today. So that's all I'm just highlighting. If you want children, if you don't want children, this doesn't apply. But if you want children, you need to go past, do you want children? How will you parent? Because the how you will you parent gets into the stuff you were just talking about, right? So I'm just saying that's the deeper level if you want children. If you don't want children, number one, doesn't apply. So let's get into the conflict resolution real quick. So again, how do you play when there's conflict? It's like I thought about this today right before the show. Like, I don't know if you follow NBA basketball or not, right? But James Harden just went to Philly, and they 5-0 and they doing their thing, right? So everybody picking up like, wow, this is coming out, this is coming up better than what you know. But the reality of any situation, if you want to even call that analogy of marriage and basketball, we don't know how good they are until they have an issue, until they run into some conflict. That's when you know how good they are, because you got to evaluate, how do they get through that stress? How do they get through that time? How many of us have married in a honeymoon stage and haven't experienced enough conflict until married to figure out how we play?
I feel like that's so multifaceted, because when you talk about like being with somebody and like how do they deal with conflict, like I feel like to a certain degree, like there has to be a level of comfortableness for someone to even like show you how they really are, you know, because some of your personality will play into how I react to the conflicts that I'm experiencing. And there will be ways that I respond without you even being in the picture. And so I think for me, it still comes back to like, how are you on your journey? Because if you're not healed and we're going through conflict and you haven't learned how to manage those issues that you're having, like it's going to come into play in our relationship and how we're trying to resolve conflict, because you're at war with yourself. So you're automatically at war with everybody else when it comes to conflict, because you have not mastered yourself and what you need and being able to communicate that.
So let's be clear. So what you just said is a sign of who not to move forward with. Again, what must you find? This is the topic today. What must you find in a mate? So in the event that somebody hasn't learned to play fair during conflict, that's your red flag. But what are we doing? We're getting together anyway, but based on a lot of other things that we like. But the thing that's going to pull you apart is this person doesn't play fair for a lot of the reasons that you're talking about, right? So that's what I'm saying. What must you find in a mate, especially in an era where conflict resolution we didn't learn it naturally in the home. So it becomes a bigger point. We're really not saying much different. What you're focused on and looking in the other person, I'm just saying the best way to figure it out, because like you said, to a degree, everything doesn't show itself. Everybody's not comfortable, but you know when it will show itself? If you don't know how to play fair, you don't know how to play fair.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? So
yeah.
That's why I'm pointing out it's a must-have. And you could be the one who don't know how to play fair. Like I'll give an analogy and give you. I want to hear your thoughts on this. So an analogy is it's like a drunk driver still gets held accountable for having a wreck and hurting someone, right? They get held accountable. That same drunk driver probably wouldn't have had that accident if they were not drunk. So here's the accountability. The accountability is even though you were drunk. So how many of us today who have never had any forms of conflict resolution? It's not something that's taught in school. We didn't see it at home. So how many of us will, with our significant others, since they're supposed to be with us, try to make them accept, well, once I get to this stage, or once you make me mad, similar to I've gotten drunk, and we're using it as an excuse, but a drunk driver still held for their, just the responsibility is still there. How many of us actually bow out of the responsibility once our mate, we've told them, don't trigger us this way. Then once they trigger us, we think we can act however, talk down on them, talk however we want, call them out their name, because they did a trigger that we told. And I'm not saying that person doing a trigger is okay, but playing fair is both people not having the excuse of I've been triggered, because at the end of the day, we always talk about this. When people at their jobs, this is just a relationship where there's an employee and a boss. There are certain things your boss might piss you off, but you will handle it a certain way. We won't go home and give that same respect to our significant other when we have a difficult situation, which is who should get it more so than your boss, because y'all committed to each other. You maybe have children now, but y'all have a knockdown, drag out in front of the children versus affording your significant other more respect, man or woman. The man might not, he'll talk to his woman the way he won't talk to his boss. Who should get that? If you ever seen the Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, that dialogue where she says, he was like, you'll go to work and put on all day. Mm-hmm. And don't say, well, I can't come home and lie to you. She was like, you better. I'm talking about the put on part, because what she's saying is you giving this man the best of you and I can't get that side of you.
Right.
That's what, so that's, go ahead and jump in, Queen. But I just wanted to, so we really wasn't saying much different. I'm just saying, if the topic is what must you have in a mate, it has to be someone who knows how to play fair. And the reality is, to what you said, our own traumas, typically, a lot of us don't know how to play play fair. So it's a process for us, but you should seek it out. Once you learn how to play fair, you damn sure better get it. But a lot of times we will love someone and get in it anyway, and that not playing fair is what breaks down the relationship, the marriage, even when there are children involved, because eventually you can't take that. That was the red flag. Go ahead, Queen.
No, I agree. I think for me, it kind of just speaks to this, like, are we able to create a space where we can learn how to like do that together? Because if you have not experienced conflict resolution, so you don't know how that works, or even how you show up in conflict in order for you to try to proactively communicate that to someone, like, you are learning as you're going through it. So like wanting a partner that is open to learning those things with you, like open to learning you and how you are, because that's all part of it, as well as giving you grace and space to like expand and evolve behind that. Because I feel like oftentimes when you talk about relationships, like a lot of people don't give you space to become or evolve within that relationship. And so it kind of like leaves you where you are at whatever point they found you, whatever point they kind of stuck you in their mind, like, this is who you are to me. There's no space for you to grow.
Right.
And so I think that kind of.
That's fair. That's, I'm glad you brought it up. So I like to be clear, because I'll say this, one, I'm not talking that way because I never talk in extremes.
Right.
Right. And the reason I keep highlighting, since our culture to a degree hasn't seen this happen naturally, most of us haven't seen it in our generation. So the reason I'm highlighting that is, and I think I said this on the show the other Saturday as well. I said, like, we can't get like, we're talking about this healing talk all the time, but we can't be naive about it. But our minds are linear, and that's what you're talking about. We'll go to the extreme, and so we're waiting for the healed person. The reality is, it will have to take place together. That's the way it is. However, when I say it's a red flag, the red flag is the unwillingness.
Right, you know right. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. Because if a clear sign of unwillingness is, I do that once I do that. That's a clear example of unwillingness. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not saying, I'm sorry I did that and I want to work on it, because I do that. Now that I figured out this trigger comes from something that, maybe therapy could help them figure out or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But if the only excuse is, if you do that, I'm going to bring you hell, that's a clear sign. But people go forward with those people anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So there is a acknowledgement. And I'll give an example on the last thing that I would add on, 3 things you must have. And I think this is a great way of looking at it. So another thing that I feel like you must have in a mate in today's time, with the way, especially with inflation and everything, just highlighting this, is I think you have to have some common ground on how you are with finances.
Facts.
And
big facts.
And a lot of people, like, I remember like years ago when I would look up the reasons for divorce, money used to be number one. And I did some more research, and it's actually moved down as the number one. It's not the number one reason anymore, more for divorce, believe it or not. But like 30 years ago, it was when I used to do research in college. But it's not. It's like third now. But it's still a big portion for why a lot of marriages don't make it, right? So it's still a very important thing. But the only way, just to highlight this real quick, the only way you could get away with the opposite stuff is if you realize, let's say you and I are married, and you're a financial person, right? So you're great with money. So if we were opposites, the only way we could get through being opposite about money, if my ego was, okay, you do all the money because you're better with money. So that's the only time opposite can kind of work, is when the person who realizes they don't know what the hell they're doing with money just concedes. But if we're going to fight for control of the money and we're different, it's going to create a huge issue. And here's the example I'll give. And this is, I think, a lead into what working with one another looks like. So when we say opposites on money, something that hardly a lot of times won't even come up for a lot of couples until marriage counseling is the credit conversation. Like, people will be fully in love, fully vested, got an engagement, and credit comes up right before the marriage, or sometimes it don't even come up to after the marriage, right? Well, me being a former loan officer, I can tell you, we can tell a whole lot more than just how you are about your money from your credit report. Like, it's crazy what we can tell about a person. I'm talking about, like, I don't even want. I ain't even gonna go how deep we can go with it, but we would be right 90% of the time about how this person was as we were helping them through the home buying process, right? When I used to be a loan officer. And once we got their credit report, we knew how the situation was going to go, with like how they were going to be, what they were going to fight us on, just based on how deep we could get into that credit report, right? And so a great piece of advice on if your opposite is on money is the willingness, if you're thinking about marrying somebody specifically or long term, is the willingness to talk about the credit report. It's not easy to do because we're taught to hide our money. Logically, it's not. So I'm not saying what I'm saying is easy, but when I say you must have it, you need to know whether you're different. Because if your opposites on money, it will be the thing that breaks your relationship up and definitely your marriage up. But let's go into the credit thing, and then I'm gonna get off this thing. So with the credit thing, so if you have effed up credit, let's say, you know, I just keep using us as you're on here with me as an example. Say we're getting together and like I had identity theft. So right now my credit ain't where it used to be. And even then it was on a good question of condition. I'm gonna answer your question too. So so my credit is not even where it used to be. And it's all for me, it's always been average or whatever.
Right.
And that for kind of your credit report will reflect your life. So I'll admit that, right? But it looks bad now. But like when we're doing a loan evaluation, when we can see like a credit identity theft, then that dismisses. We don't even look at that part. We want to see how you are throughout the time, right? But anyway, let's say we're together and I messed up your credit because we're looking at this. And so, you know, we're willing to do it. Most people really hide all of that. And most people are going to hide it, or the people that are naturally afraid to share it with someone before they trust them that much. So I get it. But if you're thinking about marriage, and a lot of people will have decided already, and the first time they even want to look at the credit is if their marriage counselor said, have y'all looked at this before you get married? That's a lot of times the first time. And some marriage counselors don't even do that. The best ones do, right? So when you look at it, they're about to get married, and dang, this person found out can't even be on the house. This kind of stuff. But I'm telling you, let me walk through this and then I'm done. So in that let's say you're a finance coach. So I'm assuming let's say you 750, right?
I mean, I'm higher than that, but we can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just using it for
down. You
so
know,
you're 750 and I'm 550, right? We look into it prior. People take the advice that I'm giving them, right? So we look at it prior. So you're probably opposites on how you handle your money too. You at 750 and me at 550. Well, the thing is, great time since we're getting to know each other. We ain't got married yet. Is will I take, in your situation, it, but if I work to get my 550 up to a 650, you can work with that. That's doing it together, right?
Right.
If I got my 550 and depend on your 750 only, that's not somebody to, you know what I'm saying? That's when it becomes the red flag. We're getting married. We're worrying about a legacy. This number is going to matter. So
right.
I'm figuring out, we've talked about how we want to raise kids. And if we're now keeping legacy in mind, but you don't want to work on your credit score prior to it, because you can do it after the fact, but if you don't want to work on it too, and you already was scared to tell me, you see what I'm saying? So the willingness to improve it prior to the marriage is a great sign to say, okay, I can work with this person with the 550, but the person with the 550 that won't, I'm telling you that 550 tell you a whole lot. I'm talking about they earn their 550. No identity theft. You feel me? Like, it's a whole lot that's going to come with that. That's going to come up in the marriage. It's going to be an issue related on how y'all do with your finances. So those are the three things I would highlight. To answer Kadish's question, she says, how soon do you ask about seeing that credit report? I would just say, if you're talking about being long-term with someone, there's not necessarily a right time, but the idea, if you both have decided you want to be long-term, I'm even going to highlight want to be married, then it's an understandable question at the point that y'all have said we want to work towards something long-term. They still may not receive it well based on their situation. Most people won't be used to it, but great time to see how you dialogue about hard conversations prior to being married. So once you're talking about long-term, and there's a way to say it. Like, there's a way you like the way. Here's something too to keep in mind as far as how you play during conflict. Bringing it up shouldn't be conflict, but you're probably going to be nice and sweet about how you bring it up because you know it's a sensitive conversation. So a lot of times, once we've been in relationships for a long time or married for a long time, because now you've got somebody who you've allowed to see your flaws and they still love you, right? So once we get that comfortable, we stop approaching them sweetly on bringing information. Like, you should keep that in the marriage.
Right.
And the reason I'm highlighting that is because the relationship coach Vaughn, the Alchemist, came on my show last Saturday, and it was so key. And I think I'm going to end with this. He said, within your relationship, you should be working to be likable. And what happens is once we get comfortable, we lose sight of that. So working to be likable also means that, say you and I are married. I keep using this as an example, but you and I are married, and you do something that I don't like that we've talked about in the past, and this is maybe the second time or the third time you've done it. I don't like it. We addressing it. If I talk to you in a raised voice or call you out your name because it's the third time, it ain't finna help. That part ain't finna help, because the first time you did it, the way I approached it had us talking about it. So we still got to talk about it, but we think in our mind, but it's the third time. You already been here 4 years. I can talk to you any kind of way to bring it up. Like, it's a huge mistake to not give that respect and grace to the person that you've said, I'm finna try to make this a lifetime with.
Right.
It could be the boss third time. We still gonna approach the boss an appropriate way, and you've got to have the dialogue. So I'm simply saying, never lose sight of trying to be likable in the relationship. And that really helps with the conflict resolution part, which, again, emotionally, most of our community, all of us are having to learn. You can learn along the way with somebody, because the reality is very rarely are you going to walk into a situation where you're both healed anyway. So you got to work with each other, but it has to be a situation where the 550 get to 650 before you marry. The person that try to stay at 550, or the person say, well, this is how I am, and you got to accept this about me, they ain't trying to work on it. So that's your red flag. So I'm going to leave it with that as some of the 3 things that I think, people must have, especially in 2022. And the conflict resolution is the number one of that. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's funny. It was funny. Kadisha says, "I asked you 3 times. I'm not asking nicely the 4th time."
Either you gonna get it or you gonna get it. We're not about to have this conversation again.
I didn't say you have to be nice now. I didn't say you have to be nice. I didn't say you have to be nice. But just don't be disrespectful. That's a way to be without being disrespectful. But I feel you, Queen. But yeah, absolutely. No, I respect that. But I think I'm gonna leave it with that. Any other thoughts before we get out this thing?
No, I feel like people really have to take the time to define what a relationship means to them, and like what all it entails. And like, we just can't go with what everybody else says, because we all have our own experiences. We all define things different ways, even as simple as like, what does a cloudy day look like, right? Like, you might describe that completely different from me. And so, like, as long as you can create your own definitions of what a relationship looks like and what you're looking for, and be on the same page with the person that you're trying to build with, that's all that matters. And like, everything that's going on in our society right now, people are trying to make it seem like you have to fit into a cookie cutter. You have to do all this other stuff. It's about what you and your partner define and how y'all move forward with it. That's all that matters at the end of the day. You just have to take the time to know yourself and define this stuff for yourself.
So I would add, that's part of the mistake, is to think that that's all that matters. I think you can get away without, number one, if you don't want children. But if you want children, that ain't all that matters. Because that's a whole nother conversation. Like, you can have what you just said and still miss on how you're going to raise the children. So I'm just highlighting. But I agree. I'm saying, I'm not trying to put anybody in a cookie cutter, but I'm just adding to what you're saying. Like, a lot of people land at that space, but you can land at that space kind of still within the selfish mindset of today. I'm just being very critical of, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just adding that even what you just said can still leave out legacy. I'm just highlighting that it can. That it can.
I mean, I feel like if what you define as a relationship is you having legacy and having children and raising them healthy and whole, right? Like, because it shouldn't just stop at like, what do I want with my partner? You should be thinking about that legacy aspect. Like, where will this relationship take us? Like, that should be part of the conversation that you're having.
Yeah, well, I'm just adding it because I'm just simply saying what you said. People don't do that now.
Right.
We're getting married. What I'm just saying, what we're doing is we're doing it for ourselves, and we're literally stopping at, do you want children? Like, we're getting married, but just, do you want children? And I'm just saying how I watch people raising their children literally break their marriage up because they were so different. So I'm just adding that you're right about what you're saying, but I don't say it's all that's matter, especially because that's about the two individuals, what you're saying. And marriage, if you're talking about marriage, has never been about just the two individuals. You can get away with that if those two individuals don't want children. What you say, it works perfect. I'm just saying that the reason a whole lot of marriages have stayed together is because they knew they had to be committed for the raising of these children. People are jumping out of marriages now because that wasn't the most important part. It becomes easier to jump out, but you have really messed up the children in a lot of cases. I'm not saying stay married no matter what. There's plenty of married couples that should be divorced, and it's going to mess the children up if they stay together. So I'm not acting like there's a cookie cutter, one thing be all. But however, since most of us are getting married without literally without legacy in mind, we're literally just having these babies. And then we are the generation that, come to find out, our trauma is, oh, I didn't know I was this way because my daddy wasn't in my life for this part. We didn't even know. So that's why I'm really harping on, it's not simply what you and I figure out amongst ourselves if children are going to be involved. If not, it can be just what you said. I hope I'm clearing that up.
I mean, I agree to a certain extent, but like I feel like the part where I'm coming from is like, if you don't know what you want in a relationship, it is almost impossible to get with someone else and like try to figure. You have to know in advance of what you want. There are some things that will change as a part of you like meeting this other person, and like maybe you think they would be a great partner to have children with. But like, you should have an idea of what it is that you're seeking and desiring, so that so that you have defined it for yourself. Like, if you're saying,
I hope what I'm saying doesn't suggest that I'm not, that doesn't include what I'm saying. However, I will say that what you're saying has only been explored as society has gotten to the point to where we can explore existential thinking and these other things, because humans have figured this out without figuring out what you talked about for 5,000 years. And so I'm highlighting, I'm really placing legacy in its proper place. Like what you're saying, as I'm not disagreeing, but
no, I get that.
We've made it so important that humans have figured that out without all that stuff for years. Now that we're doing that, we ain't having no children, or we going ahead and having babies and ain't getting married because we're so focused on, I'm just highlighting that we have legacy misplaced. So I love what you're saying if children are not going to be involved. But if children are going to be involved, it ain't that simple. That's what I'm saying.
But I feel like, I think like part of where I'm coming from is this fact that like people have midlife crises, right? Like just at some random point in their life, because they have not taken the time to determine what it is that they want for themselves, or like what they truly desire, right? Like they just have this crisis of like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing now? So
I'm just here saying I'm not disregarding
that.
I
agree that you're not disagreeing. I think that we're placing importance on two different things, and that's okay. But I still feel like, because at the end of the day, even though you have these children, as a parent, at some point, you have to detach that relationship to let your child be an adult and navigate this world. So at some point, you are going to have to come back to you and your partner being in that relationship. And if you have not decided what that looks like, not just, oh, we're going to get married, not just, oh, we're going to have kids and leave this legacy, but also what does it look like once we're no longer actively parenting?
I'm just trying to figure out, where do you feel like I'm not saying that? That's weird, because it feels like you're like, I guess what I'm saying seems like you feel like I'm leaving out that part because you harping on it as if I'm just saying finding these things as if I'm leaving. Because I mean, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of, and I'm being particular because I'm still so focused on where we have went awry. Is we're so focused on that we don't have families.
But I don't think we're so focused on that per se. I feel like people are not taking the opportunity to learn themselves. So they're just emulating what they see. They're just copying what other people see. They're copying like, oh, this person got a Mercedes, I want a Mercedes. Like even for everything that I see on social media, everything is like, oh, well, tell me how you did this. What perfume should I get? What clothes should I get? What shoes should I get? Sis, I need you to have an idea of what you actually like so that you can make a decision for yourself.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I feel like we've gotten to what you're saying you see based on not having been brought up in proper family structures. And proper family structures focus way more on why we're here than a lot of what we're focused on selfishly today. I'm not disagreeing that that's what people are doing, but we're also making it the number one factor for how we're supposed to get together. And when it don't work out, we out, even if children are involved. Because we still, that mindset does not have a proper placement of, because when you have a proper placement, I also have to figure out how will you parent in addition to the stuff you're saying. I have to figure that out. When I understand why we're even doing this, when I put the foundation back in place. So so what you're saying, but that ain't enough, because I've watched plenty of people still mess it up, just focused on themselves to that degree.
Yeah, but I'm not saying like to focus on yourself. I'm saying that you should be able to define what it is that you want.
I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
Right. And then when you
that.
find someone else, like you all are now having the conversation about what it is that we want, because we've defined it for ourselves, because we know like this is what I want. If you want marriage, you know that you want marriage, right? Yeah. If you want children, for the most part, you know that you want children. If you are interested in legacy building, you are interested in legacy building. Like how am I going to leave this world? What mark am I going to leave, right? What things am I going to leave for my children? I feel like that is a part of it, but you have to know that you want that for yourself.
I've never disagreed with that at all. Like I've never disagreed.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. That's all that I'm saying. You have to know what you want for yourself before you even bring another person into the equation. Because if you don't know what you want for yourself, if you don't know that I want marriage, right? And if you have not thought about what is marriage going to require me, what am I going to have to sacrifice? What am I going to have to compromise on? Not that you're going to know this in entirety because you don't know who your partner is going to be, but if you don't know that you want marriage and you start talking to somebody that wants marriage, like unless it's like someone that just completely changes your mind or puts you onto some new stuff about what marriage looks like and how you think you could show up in it, you're setting yourself up for failure because y'all are on two different wavelengths, and that's okay. But like you have to be
I wouldn't even know how I would even encourage some people that haven't figured that out. You know what I mean? So I feel you on that. Like at the end of the day, I think that just kind of comes, like people are doing it without that. Like that's very loose. So I can give you that. You know what I mean? It's just I just wanted to add more to it.
Okay.
Based on why things work. It's like it's just so misplaced.
Yeah, I think mine is so loose and like so general is because like I feel like having kids is a relative thing. I feel like there's ways for people to leave legacy without it being children. And so like because I'm open to the idea of children, like I don't necessarily see it as like legacy is only tied to children.
So right. So like I said, I make space for you from the standpoint of that part doesn't apply to, like if the children are kind of a afterthought or it's cool, I ain't talking to y'all at all. So like I said, this number one only applies if you know you want children.
Right. But so But so like that in and of itself is like kind of ostracizing, right? Because it tends to be either you want kids or you don't want kids in our society. And like I'm kind of in the middle. Like if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, like I'm gonna be okay with it. And so like, why is it that the things that should be considered or like the things that are important for a relationship get diminished because of like kids? And I know you're not saying that, but
well,
like
I am saying that when it comes to marriage, again, the history of what marriage stands for, was for. Like, I'm not telling people that don't want children not to get married, but if they're not having children, it has nothing to do with the history of what marriage is for. Like, I ain't even tripping if you get married or don't get married. You can say, we're gonna stay together for life. You're not getting married. It's all good. So you take it. So I am saying it from the understanding that if children are going to come out of this bond,
right,
then the level of importance that they've been historically is way higher than in 2022. It has been a major reason why you've stuck through stuff you typically would not need to or care to stick through with another person if it's just you and that person. And that there's a reason that's always been the case. And because that has been minimized is why I'm very much highlighting it for those who want children. So again, of the three things I said, it only applies for those that do. And
right.
so I'm not, it's, so I am diminishing it from the standpoint of what you understand when we are the proper placement of what that has meant historically when it comes to marriage. So I'm trying to, yeah, you see what I'm saying? But it does not apply if you and I are kind of like, if kids happens, it happens. I think it's a little dangerous based on when it comes to children. I'm not or whatever, but if we decide to do it and then we take that serious, that works just fine. But it's a little dangerous just from the standpoint of, if that becomes, even if I decide, okay, yeah, I'm ready, and then we start having that conversation, if I'm not smart about that conversation, I may find out it's still not as important to you. That's going to be an issue. And a lot of people fail to have that conversation. We just, you know what I'm saying? Like, we just kind of decided to do it. That ain't how we should be bringing these kids into the world. That's all I'm saying. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And like I said, no problems if you don't. You're not looked down upon if you don't. I'm just talking about making sure the kids are that type of priority. It's all good, though, Queen. Love the conversation. Thank you for jumping on with me. I'm going to try to keep these things at an hour, so I'm going to jump off this. I normally read a piece from my upcoming book, but I will just let people on this broadcast know I'm actually seriously considering changing the name of the book. And so I won't read a piece tonight because I'm probably going to change the name. It doesn't change the structure of the book, but instead of me reading a book from my upcoming Just My 3 Cents book, it may not be that name anymore. So I'm not going to read a piece like I normally do for every show. But thank you so much for the dialogue. I welcome it. Appreciate you very much, Queen.
All right. Have a good one.
Absolutely. One thing. So hope we made it make sense tonight. And definitely enjoyed going back with one of my back and forth with one of my Queens of Intellect members. I think I got to most of the comments. Thank you, Soul Scribe, for checking us out. Let me end it with this screen. I'm so happy I'm remembering this right now. I always forget to end with this screen. I played it at the beginning by accident. All right, we out this thing. Hope we made it make sense. Hopefully see y'all next Wednesday or Thursday. I try to do them every Wednesday or Thursday night. So I'll see y'all next week.